The envelope had been lying on the kitchen table for 3 days. Thick cream-colored paper, gold embossing. Even to the touch, you could tell there was something official inside. I knew what was there, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. In a house too big for one person, the silence was deafening. Once, Elaine's laughter and Pierce's little feet running down the hallways filled the space. Now, only the creaking of the floorboards under my feet and the hum of the refrigerator could be heard. I poured myself a whiskey, just 2 fingers, even though the temptation was strong, and finally opened the envelope. Inside was exactly what I expected, an invitation to the wedding of my son Pierce and his bride-to-be, Vanity Hensley. June 20th, Blue Ridge Country Club, Louisville, Kentucky. My address was written in perfect calligraphy, but there was no note inside, not even a signature. 5 years. 5 years since Elaine passed away, and our relationship with our son turned into a Cold War. I grimaced as I recalled the last serious conversation I had with Pierce at his mother's funeral. "You were never a real father," he had said to me then. "Always just work, projects, deadlines. And now it's too late to fix anything." Maybe he was right about some things. 35 years in engineering don't go by in vain. I built bridges all over the country, but I never managed to build the right bridge to my own son. Elaine was the buffer between us, smoothing things over, explaining us to each other. Without her, we were strangers. I finished my whiskey and took out my phone. My finger hovered over Pierce's number. Should I call? For the past 3 years, our communication had been limited to dry messages on Christmas and birthdays. I found out about the engagement from mutual acquaintances, but a wedding invitation is something else. Maybe he's ready to reconcile. Before I could press call, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Randall Oakhart speaking," I said, using the name I had become accustomed to over years of business negotiations. "Mr. Oakhart, good afternoon. My name is Tabitha King, and I'm a wedding planner with Golden Knot. I'm working on the ceremony for your son Pierce and Miss Hensley." The voice on the line sounded professionally cheerful. "I have a few questions about the financial side of the event. Pierce said you were willing to cover the main expenses?" I paused. This was news to me. My son hadn't discussed anything like this with me. "Miss King, I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding. My son and I haven't discussed financing the wedding." There was an awkward pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, I'm sorry. I was told that you—" "In that case, I'd better contact Pierce directly." "Wait," I stopped her. "What is the approximate budget for the event?" Tabitha named a figure that made my eyebrows involuntarily rise. For an engineer with my experience, money was not a problem, but it was still a significant amount. "I'll call you back, Miss King," I said and hung up. Stepping out onto the back porch with a fresh glass of whiskey, I gazed out at my well-tended garden for a long time. Elaine loved roses, and I continued to care for them, even though the gardener had suggested replacing them with something less finicky. The strange business of financing the wedding bothered me. Why did Pierce decide I would pay? And why hadn't he discussed it with me directly? 2 days later, I received a message from my son. It was short and to the point. "Hi, did you get the invitation? We need to discuss the details. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock at the Starbucks on 4th Street. I arrived early and took a table in the corner. Pierce was 20 minutes late. He had changed in the 6 months since we last saw each other. He had lost weight, grown a fashionable beard, and was dressed expensively and stylishly. His entire appearance reflected the influence of Vanity, a girl from Louisville high society whom he had met at some charity event. I had only seen her in photos on social media, a petite blonde with a sharp chin and eyes that never smiled, even when her lips did. "Hi." Pierce nodded at me and sat down across from me without extending his hand. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," I replied. "Congratulations on your engagement. Officially, so to speak." He nodded again without looking me in the eye. He ordered a barista coffee and only then got down to business. "Vanity and I want a beautiful wedding. Her parents, well, they're having some financial difficulties right now. Temporary, of course. Samuel is investing in a new project, and almost all of his funds are tied up." I looked closely at my son. His voice sounded rehearsed, as if he were repeating someone else's words. "What about you?" I asked. "As far as I remember, things were going well at your firm." Pierce worked at a law firm specializing in corporate law. The pay was decent, though certainly not enough for a lavish wedding at a country club. "We're downsizing," he replied reluctantly. "Plus, I took out a loan for a car. And Vanity and I have found a house." He fell silent, still avoiding my gaze. "And you decided that I would pay for the wedding?" I asked bluntly. Pierce finally looked at me. "You're my father, and you have money," he said defiantly. "Consider it compensation for all the years you weren't there." I felt a wave of anger rising inside me, but I suppressed it. Not here. Not now. The wedding planner called me. Tabitha, I think. "And what did you tell her?" Pierce asked quickly. "That I need to talk to you." I took a sip of my cold tea. "The amount she quoted is impressive." Pierce looked annoyed. "If you can't or don't want to help, just say so. We'll figure something out." "I didn't say I wouldn't help. I just want to know what my money's going toward. And why did you decide I would pay without even asking me?" "Forget it," Pierce said abruptly, standing up. "It was a mistake. We'll manage on our own." "Sit down," I said, my voice quiet but authoritative. My habit of giving orders on the construction site had stayed with me. "Let's talk like adults." He hesitated, then reluctantly sat back down. "I'll help with the wedding expenses," I said, "but I want to be involved in the process. I want to know where the money's going, and I want to meet Vanity's parents before the ceremony." Pierce's face changed. He clearly hadn't expected this turn of events. "Why? We've already planned everything with Vanity and Tabitha." "It's my condition," I remained adamant. "If I'm paying, I want to be part of the process, and I want to meet the family my son is joining." Pierce was silent, tapping his fingers on the table, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Then he nodded reluctantly. "All right, I'll arrange a meeting with Hensley and Tabitha. But I'm warning you, Vanity won't like it. She has a clear vision of our wedding." "I'm sure we'll find common ground," I replied, although something told me otherwise. That evening I was sitting on the porch of my house when I noticed Eudora Preston, my neighbor, walking her dachshund Irwin. "Randall!" She waved at me cheerfully. "Haven't seen you around in a while. All work and no play?" Eudora was a widow like me, but about 10 years older. She and her husband Frank used to be friends with our families, but after his death and Elaine's departure, we rarely saw each other, although she was always kind to me. "Not anymore," I replied. "I retired last year." "And you did the right thing." She came closer, leading a reluctant Irvin on a leash. "You have to make time to live for yourself. By the way, I heard your Pierce is getting married." Mrs. Flynn from across the street said she saw him with a beautiful blonde. "Yes, the wedding is in June," I confirmed, surprised at how bitter it sounded. Eudora looked at me intently with her piercing eyes. "Is something wrong?" I sighed. Eudora always knew how to read people. "Everything's fine. It's just that my son and I haven't been very close in recent years." "After Elaine," she nodded understandingly. "You know, my Tommy also distanced himself from me after Frank's death. He said I had changed, but then nothing. Time heals everything. Now he calls every week from Portland." "It's more complicated for us." I waved my hand vaguely. "Pierce thinks I was a bad father. Maybe he's right." "Nonsense," Eudora cut in. "You always provided for your family, and Elaine never complained, and she would have said something if there was anything to complain about." She paused, then added, "But you know, sometimes children only see what they want to see. It's easier for them to blame their parents for all their problems." Irwin tugged insistently at the leash, and Eudora reluctantly moved on. "A wedding is a good opportunity to mend relationships," she said finally. "Don't miss your chance, Randall." I sat on the porch for a long time after she left. Maybe Eudora was right. Maybe this really was a chance. I took out my phone and dialed Tabitha King's number. "Miss King, this is Randall Oakhart. I'm ready to discuss financing my son's wedding. When can we meet?" I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing. Something about Pierce's behavior alarmed me, but I had lived too long in the past, clinging to resentments and regrets. Maybe it was time to move forward, even if the road ahead was difficult. After all, Pierce was the only family I had left, and if paying for the wedding would help us repair our relationship, well, it would be worth any amount of money. The Blue Ridge Country Club looked exactly as I had expected. A pompous, pseudo-colonial building, immaculately manicured lawns, and a private road so long that visitors had time to feel special as they drove up to the main entrance. I parked my old Volvo next to a brand new Mercedes and a Cadillac Escalade SUV. My car looked out of place here, just like I did. Tabitha King was waiting for me in the lobby, a petite, energetic woman with a tablet in her hands and a headset in her ear. She recognized me instantly and approached me with a professional smile. "Mr. Oakhart, it's a pleasure to meet you in person. The Hensley family's already here, viewing the main hall." I nodded and followed her through a series of rooms, noting the details of the interior, as I had become accustomed to doing over years of working with architects. Solid workmanship, expensive materials, though too pretentious for my taste. A small group of people was waiting for us in a spacious hall with panoramic windows overlooking the golf course. I immediately recognized Pierce, who was shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. Next to him stood Vanity. In real life, she looked even colder and more calculating than in photographs. Her slender fingers, with their perfect manicure, clasped my son's elbow with possessive confidence. There were two others with them, obviously Vanity's parents. Samuel Hensley turned out to be a tall, thin man with thinning hair combed to the side in a futile attempt to hide his receding hairline. His wife, Beverly, was a carbon copy of Vanity, only 25 years older. The same sharp features, the same artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And here's the groom," Samuel said with a forced smile, stepping forward. Then, noticing the confusion on my face, he corrected himself. "Ah, you're the groom's father." "I'm sorry." I felt a pang of irritation. He knew perfectly well who I was. It was the first small jab intended to put me in my place. "Randall Oakhart," I extended my hand, which Samuel shook reluctantly, barely touching it. "We're so glad you could join us, Mr. Oakhart," Beverly cooed. "Pierce has said so little about you that we were beginning to think you were, let's say, not in the picture." I glanced at my son, but he was intently studying the pattern on the carpet. "I'm always in the picture when it comes to my son, Mrs. Hensley," I replied calmly. "I just prefer to stay in the background." "Charming," Beverly smiled even wider, but her eyes remained cold. "Well, let's get down to business. Tabitha says you want to be involved in the planning process? Since I'm paying for most of the expenses, yes. I'd like to know where the money's going." An awkward pause ensued. Vanity squeezed Pierce's hand tighter, and he finally looked up, glaring at me with poorly concealed irritation. "Dad, we've already planned everything. All you have to do is sign the checks." "Are you really surprised?" I addressed Pierce directly, ignoring the others. "Have you called me even once in the last 3 weeks? Have you discussed the details with me?" "No. You just decided that I would write a check and disappear." "Gentlemen, please," Tabitha interjected with a professional smile. "Let's focus on the positive. Mr. Oakhart, I have prepared a complete list of expenses with details. I can email it to you or print it out right now." "Print it out, please." As Tabitha walked over to her bag to get the documents, I noticed Samuel and Beverly exchange meaningful glances. They clearly hadn't expected me to ask questions. The next hour was spent discussing the details: the menu, flowers, music, photographer. Or rather, not discussion, but a monologue by Vanity, who described in minute detail what she wanted. Pierce just nodded, agreeing with everything. I hardly recognized my son, the confident lawyer who had now become a passive appendage to his fiancée. "What about the guest list?" I asked when Vanity paused. 200 people, she replied without batting an eye. "Mostly our business partners and family friends." "And how many of those 200 are Pierce's friends or relatives?" Vanity hesitated, clearly not expecting that question. "Well, we made the list together." 37, Pierce said unexpectedly. 37 people on the list are my guess." I nodded slowly, trying not to show how much that ratio bothered me. My son had always been sociable, with many friends in school and college. But now he was allowing the Hensleys to turn his own wedding into their social event. "I'd like to add a few names," I said calmly. "Old friends of our family, people who have known Pierce since childhood." "I'm afraid the list has already been agreed upon with the catering service," Vanity replied quickly, "and we can't exceed the guest limit for this hall." "In that case, you can replace some of your guests with mine," I smiled, looking her straight in the eye. "I'm sure not all of your business partners are that important." Beverly made a sound like a stifled laugh. Samuel frowned and Pierce and Vanity exchanged tense glances. We can discuss this later, Tabitha interjected, sensing the growing tension. Now let's take a look at the ceremony site. It's in the garden behind the main building. We stepped out onto a spacious terrace overlooking a manicured garden with a rose garden and a small artificial pond. The ceremony area was marked by a white arch covered with fresh flowers. Even I, a man far from romantic, had to admit that it looked impressive. There will be rows of chairs for the guests here, Tabitha explained. The musicians will be on the right, and the procession will walk down this central aisle. As she spoke, I noticed Samuel taking Pierce aside and whispering something to him. My son listened, his shoulders slumped, nodding. It looked as if his future father-in-law was scolding him like a naughty child. What do you think, Mr. Oakhart? Tabitha brought me back to reality. Do you like the venue? It's beautiful, I replied absently, still watching my son and Samuel. Great. She made a note on her tablet. Then let's discuss the menu and the cake. The catering service has prepared several options. I listened half-heartedly, analyzing the situation. Behind the Hensley family's outward glamour, I sensed something insincere. They clearly had their sights set on Pierce, and it wasn't just Vanity's emotional attachment. There was something else going on. After inspecting the ceremony venue, we returned to the main hall to discuss the menu. Vanity insisted on exquisite French cuisine. Although I knew that Pierce had always preferred simpler food, she was in charge of the whole process, and her parents supported her every decision. What about the cake? I asked when we were done with the main menu. 6 tiers with sugar flowers and gold trim, Vanity replied immediately. The designer is already working on the sketch. And who is this designer? Charles Devereaux, the best pastry chef in the state. He made the cake for the governor's inauguration. I whistled softly. And how much does such a master cost? Vanity named a figure that made even me, a wealthy man, raise my eyebrows in surprise. Is that a reasonable expense? I turned to Pierce. Do you really need a cake like that? My son avoided my gaze. Vanity wants it that way. It's her day. As far as I remember, a wedding is a day for both spouses, I remarked. Or am I mistaken? Your ideas are outdated, Mr. Oakhart, Beverly interjected with a fake smile. Nowadays, a wedding is primarily the bride's day. Men only play a supporting role. I looked longly, then shifted my gaze to Samuel, who was smiling haughtily, and finally to Pierce, who looked downright miserable. In that case, I said calmly, since I am playing a supporting role as the sponsor of this event, I would like to know the total cost before I start writing checks. Tabitha immediately handed me a folder with a detailed estimate. I glanced through the document and realized that the initial amount she had quoted on the phone was significantly underestimated. The actual costs were almost double that. That's impressive, I said, putting the folder down, especially considering that Mr. Hensley is experiencing temporary financial difficulties and cannot contribute. A flash of irritation crossed Samuel's face. We have certain obligations that prevent us from— Of course, I interrupted him. I understand. A new project, investments, all funds are tied up. Pierce explained the situation. Dad, Pierce began, but I raised my hand to stop him. It's okay, son. I'll cover the expenses. Every single one. I turned to Tabitha. Where should I transfer the first payment? She quickly took an envelope with the details out of her bag. Here is the information for the deposits. 30% of the amount must be paid now, and the rest 2 weeks before the ceremony. Perfect. I put the envelope in my jacket's inside pocket. I'll make the transfer today. Vanity visibly relaxed, and her parents exchanged satisfied glances. They had gotten what they wanted, full financing for their dream wedding at my expense. Mr. Oakhart, Samuel suddenly became almost friendly. Since we are now one family, perhaps we could discuss some other matters. I hear you have extensive connections in the construction industry? So that's what it was. Now it was clear why they were so eager to get me as a financial donor. They wanted not only my money, but also my connections. I do have some contacts, I replied cautiously. What exactly are you interested in? Perhaps we could discuss this in a more private setting, Samuel said, looking at me meaningfully. How about over dinner next week? I nodded, making a mental note to find out more about Samuel Hensley's business. Something wasn't right here. When the main questions were over, Tabitha suggested we take a look at the dressing rooms and preparation rooms for the newlyweds. Beverly and Vanity immediately dragged Pierce away, leaving me alone with Samuel. You know, Mr. Oakhart, he began as soon as the others had moved far enough away. I'm glad we finally got to meet. Pierce has told me a lot about you. Really? I didn't hide my skepticism. I thought your wife mentioned that he hardly ever talked about me. Samuel hesitated for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. Ah, you know women. They don't always listen carefully. Pierce did talk about your successful career, your connections. We are very impressed. Thank you, I replied dryly. Although I must say that my son was never impressed by my career. Quite the contrary, it was a constant source of tension between us. People change, Mr. Oakhart. Samuel patted me on the shoulder with a familiarity I didn't appreciate at all. Pierce has matured and now appreciates what you've created. And we appreciate Pierce. Vanity simply adores him. I looked at the group ahead of me, my son, sandwiched between two powerful women who were literally dragging him along. He didn't look like someone who was adored, more like a prisoner resigned to his fate. The rest of the day went on in the same vein. We looked at all the rooms and discussed every detail of the celebration. I nodded silently, pretending that everything was fine, although inside I was growing increasingly anxious. Something here was categorically wrong. When the meeting was over, I took Pierce aside. Can I have a word with you? He nodded reluctantly, casting an apologetic glance at Vanity, who was watching us with poorly concealed irritation. Are you okay? I asked quietly. You look exhausted. Everything's fine, Pierce replied quickly. Just a lot of work and wedding preparations are taking a lot of energy. Are you sure this is what you want? I nodded toward the Hensley family. They seemed to me. Don't start, Pierce cut me off sharply. You're always like this, always trying to control everything, always thinking you know better. I love Vanity. I want to be with her, and I don't need your approval. I raised my hands in a conciliatory gesture. That's not what I meant. I'm just worried about you. You didn't worry for 30 years, and now you suddenly start. Pierce smiled bitterly. Thanks for agreeing to pay for the wedding. Really, thank you. But let's skip the small talk. He turned and walked toward his bride, leaving me standing alone with the feeling that I had just financed my son's huge mistake. But what could I do? Refuse to pay? That would only worsen our already fragile relationship. On the way home, I stopped at the bank and transferred a substantial amount to the account Tabitha had given me. It was the first installment for a wedding that, by all appearances, was being held not so much for Pierce as to bolster the Hensley family's social status. And I had little doubt that my son had no idea how much I was paying for this event. I could only hope that I wasn't making a mistake by indulging in this charade. The morning of June 22nd was surprisingly clear and windless. I woke up an hour before my alarm went off. My nerves kept me awake. Today was Pierce's wedding day. Despite all my fears and doubts, I decided to put my negative thoughts aside and focus on the main thing. It was my son's day, and I wanted everything to go perfectly. The last few weeks had been filled with hustle and bustle and constant communication with Tabitha King. I made all the necessary payments, approved the final guest list, which I struggled to include 5 people close to me, and even helped solve a problem with flour delivery when it turned out that the main supplier would not be able to fulfill the order on time. Samuel Hensley invited me to 2 business dinners, where he persistently tried to find out about my connections in the construction industry. I responded evasively, sensing the insincerity in his sudden interest in me. Pierce and I hardly communicated at all. He only called a couple of times to clarify payment details and make sure I had paid everything. There was no talk of reconciliation or restoring our relationship, but I still hoped that the wedding could be a turning point. I spent a long time choosing a suit, settling on a classic dark blue one with a silver tie. Elaine always said that this color suited me. It emphasized my eyes and made me look younger. I took a gift for Pierce and Vanity out of the safe, an envelope with a check for a substantial amount, in addition to the wedding I had already paid for, and an antique watch that had been passed down to me from my father. I wanted the family heirloom to continue its journey through the generations. At 2:30, I was completely ready. The ceremony was supposed to start at 5, but I wanted to arrive early to make sure everything was in order and perhaps talk to my son before the celebration began. Eudora saw me through the window and came out onto the porch of her house. "Randall, you look handsome today." She smiled, adjusting her gray curls. "Give my congratulations to Pierce." "I will," I nodded, getting into the car. "It's a shame you won't be at the wedding." "It's okay. I'm too old for such events." Eudora waved her hand. "Tell me later how it went." The drive to Blue Ridge took about 40 minutes. The closer I got, the more nervous I became, completely irrationally, as if I were the groom and not my son. At the turn onto the private road leading to the club, there was already a sign with the names of Pierce and Vanity and balloons. I turned, drove down a picturesque alley, and found myself in front of the main gate. Here, the first surprise awaited me. A security guard in a dark uniform came out of the booth and gestured for the car to stop. "Good afternoon, sir. What is your name?" "Randall Oakhart. I'm the groom's father." The guard checked his tablet, frowned, and looked at me again. "I'm sorry, sir, but you're not on the guest list." "What?" I couldn't believe my ears. There must be some mistake. "I'm Pierce Oakhart's father." "Check again." The security guard looked at the list again and shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. Your name is not on the list. I have strict instructions to only let in those who are on it." "This is ridiculous." I felt a wave of indignation rising inside me. "I paid for this damn wedding. Call the organizer, Tabitha King. She'll confirm who I am." After several minutes of arguing, the guard reluctantly agreed to contact the organizer. He stepped aside and spoke quietly into his radio. I waited, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel and trying to suppress my growing irritation. What nonsense was going on? "Mr. Oakhart," the guard returned with an impassive expression, "Miss King has asked you to drive to the service entrance. She will meet you there and sort out the situation." I nodded, turned the car around, and drove in the indicated direction, circling the main building. Tabitha was already waiting near the service entrance, with a tense smile and obvious concern in her eyes. "Mr. Oakhart, hello," she began as soon as I got out of the car. "There's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I interrupted her. "I'm not on the guest list for my own son's wedding, which I paid for." "This isn't a misunderstanding. It's some kind of ridiculous joke." Tabitha looked genuinely upset. "I just found out about this myself. Miss Hensley made the final changes to the list last night, and I didn't check the details." "Where's Pierce?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "I want to talk to him. He's getting ready for the ceremony. I can—" Without waiting for her to finish, I headed for the entrance to the building, but Tabitha hurried after me. "Mr. Oakhart, please. Let's sort this out first. I'm sure it's just a mistake." I stopped at the door and noticed something strange. There was an easel with an enlarged photograph next to the entrance. My photograph. As I got closer, I saw the words written in large letters. "This old man is not allowed to enter." I froze in place, unable to believe my eyes. It was a recent photo of me from social media, one of the few where I actually appeared. It seemed to have been chosen specifically. I looked particularly tired in it, with bags under my eyes after a sleepless night. What is this?" My voice was hoarse with shock and indignation. Tabitha looked completely confused. I don't know. It wasn't part of the plan. I didn't know anything about it." At that moment, the door swung open and Pierce appeared in the doorway. He was already wearing his wedding suit, elegant, clearly tailor-made. But his face was contorted into an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of contempt and cold fury. "What are you doing here?" he asked, looking at me as if I were a stranger who had invaded his private property. "What do you mean? What am I doing here?" I pointed to the photograph. "What is this circus, Pierce? Was this your idea?" "Vanity said you could come, even though we made it clear you weren't invited," Pierce said loudly, not caring who might hear him. "Looks like she was right." I felt the ground slip away beneath my feet. My own son looked at me like I was the enemy. "Not invited?" I asked. "I received a formal invitation. I paid for this wedding down to the last cent." "Oh yes, money, always money." Pierce smiled bitterly. "You think that because you paid, you bought the right to be here? Typical logic." Vanity and her mother appeared behind him. Both were already dressed to the nines. Vanity in a luxurious dress that I knew cost a fortune. Beverly in an exquisite ensemble that probably wasn't any cheaper. "What's going on?" Vanity feigned surprise. "Oh, Mr. Oakhart, you're here." "Yes, I'm here," I replied, shifting my gaze from her to Pierce. "At my son's wedding, which I paid for. And I'd like to know what this charade is all about." Vanity pressed herself against Pierce, as if seeking protection. "Pierce, I told you. I warned you he would ruin everything." My son put his arm around her shoulders possessively. "Don't worry, sweetheart. He's leaving." "Pierce!" I took a step forward, but he stopped me with a sharp movement of his hand. "No. Enough. I tried to be polite by sending you an invitation. I thought you'd get the hint and just send a gift, like normal fathers whose children don't want to talk to them do. But you, as always, decided to control everything." "I don't understand." I shook my head, feeling a cold rage growing inside me. "You asked me to pay for the wedding yourself. You set up meetings with the planner, and now you're pretending you didn't want me here?" A small crowd began to gather around us. Club employees, a few early guests. I noticed Samuel Hensley watching the scene from a safe distance, his arms crossed over his chest. "My fiancée and her parents object to your presence," Pierce said loudly, clearly playing to the crowd. "They believe you will ruin the festive atmosphere with your controlling behavior, and I agree with them." "Pierce," Tabitha's voice was pleading, "let's not—" "No, Tabitha, let everyone know," my son interrupted her. "My father was never there when I needed him. He missed my school concerts, sports competitions, graduations. He was always too busy building bridges for strangers. And now he thinks he can buy my love and respect by paying for my wedding." Pierce turned to me. "Newsflash, Dad. Some things money can't buy." Each word hit me like a slap in the face. Some of the accusations were fair. I had indeed missed many important events in my son's life because of work. But the way he was presenting it now, making me look like a monster in front of strangers, was unbearable. I said quietly. "Maybe I didn't always succeed, but I tried to be a good father." "Get out!" Pierce barked unexpectedly. "You're not needed here." "No one wants to see you, especially me." Vanity smiled, a quick, triumphant smile that she immediately hid behind a look of feigned sympathy. "Please, Mr. Oakhart," she said in a sweet voice, "don't ruin our day. Leave peacefully." I looked around at the assembled crowd, the smirking Hensleys, the embarrassed Tabitha, the curious guests, the two security guards already moving in my direction, and finally Pierce, my son, who looked at me with utter disgust. Something inside me snapped and immediately froze, turning into icy determination. If they wanted war, they would get it. "Fine," I said calmly. "I'm leaving. But remember, Pierce, today will determine our future, and that future is not what you expect." Turning around, I headed for the car. As I opened the door, I heard Pierce call after me. "Are you threatening me? That's all you know how to do. Intimidate and control." I didn't answer. Getting behind the wheel, I started the engine and slowly pulled out onto the road. Only when I was outside the estate gates did I allow myself to stop and take a deep breath. My hands were shaking and my temples were throbbing. What had happened was beyond anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just humiliation, it was complete rejection. My son had publicly disowned me, making me look like a villain in front of dozens of people. In the rearview mirror, I saw my face, pale with a frozen expression of shock. Then I took out my phone and dialed my bank's number. A woman's voice answered after the second ring. "First National Bank, how can I help you?" "Good afternoon. This is Randall Oakhart. I need to cancel several payments urgently." My voice sounded surprisingly calm, considering the storm of emotions inside. "Of course, Mr. Oakhart. You will need to verify your identity. May I ask you a few standard questions?" While the bank employee was checking my details, I opened a folder on my phone with documents related to the wedding. It contained the contact information for all the service providers I had contracted. The catering service, florists, musicians, photographer, videographer, and the company providing decorations and furniture. I had paid them all in advance, with the final payment due on the day of the event. "Your identity has been confirmed, Mr. Oakhart. Which payments would you like to cancel?" "All payments scheduled for today to the following recipients." I began to dictate a list of companies related to the wedding. "That's quite a lot of payments, sir. May I ask the reason for the cancellation? The services were not provided properly, I replied curtly. I have every right to cancel the payments according to the terms of the contracts. I understand. I will need some time to process all the requests. Some payments may already be in process. Do everything you can to stop them, I insisted. And please hurry. This is really urgent. After finishing the conversation with the bank, I began methodically calling all the service providers. With each conversation, my determination only grew stronger. I explained the situation briefly and to the point. Payments were canceled, services were no longer required, and all advances would be considered compensation for the last-minute breach of contract. Some agreed without objection, others tried to protest, but quickly gave up when I reminded them of the terms of the contracts, which I had carefully studied before signing. I was an engineer accustomed to reading technical documentation. Legal texts were no challenge for me. The last call was to the administration of the Blue Ridge Country Club. The manager was shocked by my statement. Mr. Oakhart, but the event has already started. The guests are arriving. Everything is ready for the ceremony. I'm very sorry, I said, without feeling a shred of remorse. But according to our contract, the final payment must be made before the event begins. I have just canceled that payment. Therefore, you have no legal basis to continue providing services. But this is unprecedented. What should we do with the guests? That's not my problem, I replied coldly. You can contact the Hensley family if they are willing to assume the financial obligations. Otherwise, I advise you to begin the evacuation procedure. After hanging up, I looked at my watch. Exactly 1 hour had passed since my disgraceful expulsion. It was time to return and watch the perfect wedding of my ungrateful son and his manipulative bride fall apart. I turned the car around and slowly drove back to the country club, feeling a flame of dark satisfaction burning inside me. I parked my car outside the club grounds and sat for a while, watching the guest cars pull up. Elegant women in flowing dresses, men in formal suits, they were all rushing to the celebration, unaware of the chaos that was about to unfold. I had no regrets about my decision. The humiliation I had experienced an hour ago had burned away all my doubts. Now I wanted only one thing: justice. My phone kept vibrating with incoming messages. Service providers, managers, coordinators, everyone was panicking, trying to contact me to clarify the situation. I ignored most of the calls, responding only to those who were critical to my plan. At 5:30 p.m., the first van from the Golden Plate catering service arrived. I got out of the car and walked over to the driver. Mr. Oakhart? Asked a middle-aged man in a company uniform. I'm Dwight Parker, the COO. We received your notice of contract cancellation. Is this some kind of mistake? No mistake, Mr. Parker. I canceled the payments and am terminating all agreements. The wedding is off. Dwight looked confused. But we've already delivered some of the food. The staff is here. Everything is ready. In that case, take your food and staff, I was adamant. I paid a 30% deposit, which is enough to cover your expenses. But the guests are already arriving. The ceremony's about to begin. That's not my problem, I shrugged. If the Hensley family wants to continue with the event, let them pay the remaining amount. I assume they won't be able to do that, at least not today. While we were talking, 2 more cars pulled up. One belonged to the company that provided the musical equipment, the other to the company responsible for the decorations and furniture. Judging by the concerned looks on the faces of the managers who arrived, they had also received my notices. 15 minutes later, a small group of representatives from various companies gathered at the gate. Everyone was confused. Some expressed outrage, but I remained calm, explaining the situation over and over again. Legally, I was completely in the right. None of the contracts had been fulfilled in full, as the final payments had not been received. At 5:45 p.m., Richard Ellington, the manager of the country club, joined us. His usually imperturbable face expressed extreme concern. Mr. Oakhart, he began, nervously adjusting his tie, there must be some compromise. We have 200 guests. The ceremony is about to begin. I'm afraid there will be no compromise, Mr. Ellington, I was adamant. Either someone else pays for all the services right now, or the event is canceled. And judging by our conversation with the Hensley family, they are unlikely to be able to do so. Ellington looked helplessly at the assembled company representatives, as if hoping to find support from them, but met only equally confused looks. In that case, he finally said, we will have to interrupt the event. According to club rules, we cannot hold unpaid celebrations. Quite right, I nodded, and I would like to be present for this announcement. After all, I am the groom's father. Ellington hesitated for a few seconds, but then nodded. All right, but I hope you understand that this is an unprecedented situation. I assure you, the humiliation I experienced today was also unprecedented, I replied coldly. Together with representatives from all the companies, we headed for the main building. This time, no one stopped me at the gate. The security guards were already aware of the situation and clearly did not want to exacerbate the conflict. As I had expected, the ceremony had already begun. The sounds of a string quartet drifted from the open garden doors. The guests sat in rows on white chairs decorated with flowers. Pierce stood under the arch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Next to him was his best man. They were waiting for the bride to appear. Ellington whispered something to the ceremony coordinator, and the music suddenly stopped. A surprised murmur ran through the rows of guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, Ellington said loudly, stepping into the center of the courtyard. Unfortunately, unforeseen circumstances have arisen, and we are forced to suspend the ceremony. The guests began to murmur, and Pierce stepped forward with a look of complete bewilderment on his face. What's going on? He asked, looking from Ellington to me. Noticing me among the people standing at the entrance to the garden, he froze. What are you doing here? I told you to get out. I'm afraid, Mr. Oakhart, Ellington said politely but firmly, addressing my son. There has been a problem with payment for the event. All payments have been canceled. According to club rules, we cannot continue with an unpaid celebration. Pierce turned pale. At that moment, a procession emerged from the building, the bridesmaids in matching pastel dresses, followed by Vanity on her father's arm. Seeing the ceremony come to a halt and hearing Ellington's words, she froze in place. What do you mean, payments canceled? Pierce asked, confused. We paid for everything. No, son, I stepped forward. I paid for everything, and I canceled the payments after you kicked me out of here in disgrace. Pierce stared at me, not believing his ears. You? What? At that moment, Samuel Hensley pushed his way forward. What's going on? Why did the ceremony stop? Didn't your future son-in-law tell you? I asked him with feigned surprise. I paid for the entire wedding, down to the last cent, and now I've canceled all payments. Samuel's face reflected a whole range of emotions, from bewilderment to rage. Pierce, is this true? He turned to my son. He stood with a frozen expression on his face, unable to find the words. But you said that all the expenses were covered by your savings and credit. Samuel raised his voice. I thought, it seemed to me, Pierce stammered, looking at me and then at Hensley. My father offered to help, and I decided. You decided not to mention it? Samuel interrupted him. You decided to hide from us who was really paying for the wedding? Vanity joined us, holding a luxurious bouquet in her hands. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide her shock. What's going on? Why is everyone shouting? Your fiancé has been deceiving us, dear, Samuel said. All this time, his father has been sponsoring us, not him. Vanity turned to Pierce. Is that true? Her voice sounded less like indignation and more like cold calculation. Pierce nodded, lowering his eyes. Yes, my father paid for the wedding. But you said you had savings, that you took out a loan. I lied. Pierce looked completely devastated. I didn't want you to think I couldn't provide for us. By this time, the guests had risen from their seats and gathered around, watching the drama unfold. The whispers grew louder, and many filmed the scene on their phones. Ladies and gentlemen, Ellington spoke again, trying to restore order. Due to the circumstances that have arisen, we are forced to announce a temporary suspension of the event. We ask everyone to proceed to the main hall, where additional information will be provided. The guests reluctantly complied, continuing to discuss what had happened. I noticed several waiters beginning to clear away the snacks and drinks that had already been set out. The catering director wasted no time. When we all found ourselves in the main hall, chaos ensued. The staff removed the decorations, cleared away the flowers, and packed up the equipment. The guests watched the proceedings in confusion, not knowing what to do next. This must be some kind of misunderstanding. Samuel tried to calm the situation, addressing Ellington. I'm sure we can find a solution. I personally guarantee payment. I'm very sorry, Mr. Hensley, replied the manager, but the total amount is just over $60,000. We can only accept full payment right now. Samuel turned pale. It was obvious that he didn't have that kind of money. That's a lot of money. Perhaps we could arrange an installment plan? Unfortunately, no. The club's policy is clear on this matter. As they talked, I noticed that Pierce was staring at me intently. His eyes showed a mixture of anger, humiliation, and surprisingly, a strange kind of respect. He approached me, leaving Vanity with her parents. Did you plan all this? He asked quietly. From the beginning? I shook my head. No, Pierce. I sincerely wanted to help you. I wanted to be a part of your life, your wedding, but you decided to make a fool of me. You hung my photo at the entrance with an offensive caption, publicly humiliating me. What was I supposed to do? Just walk away and let you enjoy the wedding I paid for? I didn't hang your photo, Pierce replied quietly. It was Vanity's idea. And you didn't object, I retorted. What's more, you supported the idea. You said in front of everyone that you didn't need me, that no one wanted to see me, especially you. Pierce lowered his head. I was angry, and I wanted to impress Hensley. They always looked down on me, thought I wasn't good enough for their daughter. And that's why you decided to disown your own father? My voice was quiet, but every word was filled with pain. The man who gave you life, raised you, paid for your education, and ultimately your wedding. Pierce didn't answer, but I could see in his eyes that he realized the magnitude of his mistake. At that moment, Vanity approached us. Her perfect hairstyle was beginning to fall apart, and her face was frozen in an expression of cold fury. You, she pointed her finger at my chest. You ruined everything. My perfect wedding, all my plans, everything went to ruin because of you. No, Miss Hensley, I replied calmly. Everything went down the drain because of you and my son. You decided to humiliate me, to throw me out. And yet it was my money that paid for your celebration. Did you really think you could get away with it? Pierce, she turned to my son, do something. Make him return the money. Pierce looked confused. Vanity, I can't. You're completely useless, she spat. I thought you were capable of organizing a normal wedding, but you can't even do that on your own. Finally showing your true colors, I remarked, watching her outburst. And I wondered what my son saw in such a cold and calculating person. Shut up, old man, Vanity snapped. You have no idea what you're talking about. At that moment, Beverly and Samuel joined us. We're leaving, Samuel announced, looking at his daughter. This whole charade, this humiliation, we can't stay here. But Dad, the wedding, Vanity began. There won't be a wedding, he cut her off. At least not today, and not here. He shot a contemptuous glance at Pierce, and maybe not with him. Vanity looked from her father to Pierce, then back at me. Her eyes showed not grief over the canceled wedding, but pure, undisguised rage at her ruined plans. This isn't over, she hissed, looking at me. You'll regret this. With that, she turned and followed her parents to the exit. Pierce remained standing next to me, watching his bride's receding figure. She didn't even try to defend you, I remarked. She didn't try to save the relationship. The first obstacle, and she leaves, accusing you of all mortal sins. Maybe she's right, Pierce said quietly. Maybe I really am useless. I couldn't even organize my own wedding without your help. For the first time in a long time, I felt a pang of sympathy for my son. Despite everything that had happened, he was still my child. You're not useless, Pierce. You just chose the wrong people to impress. Chaos continued around us as guests left the hall and staff cleared away the decorations and food. The music company representative was already turning off the equipment, and the florists were removing the floral arrangements. Ellington approached us with a guilty expression on his face. Mr. Oakhart, we are beginning the evacuation procedure. According to the rules, all guests must leave the premises within an hour. I nodded. Thank you, Mr. Ellington. I understand that you are just doing your job. When he walked away, Pierce looked at me. What now? His voice sounded like a mixture of defiance and confusion. Now, I replied, you will find out who is really behind your wonderful bride and her family, and why they were so eager to get you, or rather me, into their orbit. What are you talking about? The fact that the Hensley family isn't just experiencing temporary financial difficulties. They're on the verge of bankruptcy, and they needed not only my money for the wedding, but also my connections in the construction business. Samuel hinted at this quite transparently during our meetings. Pierce looked stunned. How do you know? I'm an old engineer, son. I learned long ago to check the foundation before building a bridge, and the Hensley family's foundation turned out to be rotten to the core. The main hall of the Blue Ridge Country Club turned into a battlefield. Guests gathered in small groups, animatedly discussing what was happening. The staff hurriedly cleared away the decorations and food. Vanity stood surrounded by her bridesmaids, bursting into tears. Real or fake, it was hard to tell. Samuel and Beverly Hensley tried to keep up appearances, talking to the most important guests, but even from a distance I could see beads of sweat on Samuel's forehead. Pierce looked lost. He mechanically shook hands with guests who expressed their sympathy and awkwardly said goodbye. His best man, an old college friend, stood nearby, muttering something comforting. I decided it was time to finish what I had started. If I was going to destroy it, I would do it completely. Esteemed guests, I said loudly, stepping into the center of the hall, may I have your attention for a moment? The conversations died down, and all eyes turned to me. Samuel Hensley took a step forward, as if to stop me, but I beat him to it. Many of you don't know me. I am Randall Oakhart, the groom's father, and I would like to explain what is going on here. Don't listen to him, Samuel shouted. This man is trying to sabotage his own son's happiness. Happiness? I raised an eyebrow. Do you really think your family was going to make my son happy? I think everyone here deserves to know the truth. The truth about the Hensley family and why this wedding is so important to them. A nervous whisper ran through the room. Pierce stared at me with wide eyes, making no attempt to stop me. Vanity stopped sobbing and sat up straight, staring intently at me. The Hensley family isn't just experiencing temporary financial difficulties, as they call it, I continued. Their company, Hensley Development, is on the verge of bankruptcy. Over the past 3 years, they have lost 80% of their market value. Their last 4 projects have failed due to poor quality materials and building code violations. 3 class action lawsuits have been filed against them by defrauded customers. Samuel's face turned red. That's slander. I'll sue you. Please do, I smiled. All of these facts are public information. I simply did what I should have done from the beginning. I checked out the company I was going to do business with. And you know what I found? I glanced around at the silent guests. Samuel Hensley tried several times to get contracts on projects I was working on, and every time his company was rejected because of its questionable reputation. That's not true, Samuel muttered, but without his former confidence. Samuel was desperately looking for a way out of the situation, I continued, ignoring him. And the solution came in the form of my son Pierce, a promising lawyer who had the misfortune of falling in love with Vanity. Samuel found out that Pierce was my son and saw it as an opportunity to gain access to my connections in the construction business, to my reputation. That's why they were in such a hurry to get married. That's absurd, Beverly interjected, trying to salvage what was left of her dignity. Our Vanity sincerely loves Pierce. We always thought he was a perfect match for her. Really? I looked at her ironically. Then why, in your conversations with friends that I overheard, did you call him a crude lawyer with no prospects? Why did you say you only tolerate him because of his father? I have good hearing, Mrs. Hensley, especially when it comes to my son. Beverly froze with her mouth open. Several guests, obviously close friends of theirs, exchanged knowing glances. I turned to Vanity, who was standing clutching the arm of one of the bridesmaids. And you, Miss Hensley, will you also claim to sincerely love my son? Of course, she exclaimed in a trembling voice. I love Pierce with all my heart. Strange, I shook my head. Your ex-boyfriend, Niels Carlson, whom you were secretly seeing just 2 weeks ago, thinks otherwise. A shocked gasp rippled through the room. Pierce turned sharply to Vanity. What? You were seeing Niels? Vanity paled. It was a business meeting. His father is an investor, and we were discussing... The possibility of financing your father's company? I finished for her. Yes, I know. I contacted Niels after I saw you together at the Azure Beach restaurant. He was very talkative, especially when he found out you were engaged to my son. Vanity looked at me with undisguised hatred. Have you been following me? No, I shook my head. Just a coincidence. I was having lunch there with a former colleague and noticed you. You were too close for just business partners. Pierce stepped toward Vanity. Is that true? Were you seeing him behind my back? Vanity hesitated, clearly weighing her options. Then her face contorted. So what? She spat. You think I enjoyed being with you? Listening to your endless whining about your father? About how no one understood you? How you craved attention? She snorted contemptuously. You're pathetic. The only thing of value you had was your father and his connections. And now you don't even have that. I saw how each of her words hit Pierce like a physical blow. He took a step back, his face contorted with pain and humiliation. Vanity, Samuel called out sharply. Shut up! But it was too late. The mask had fallen, and the true nature of the Hensley family was revealed to all the guests in all its glory. And she forged your signature on several documents, I added, addressing Pierce, including the request to the bank for your account statements. They wanted to know exactly how much money you had before planning their next steps. That's slander, Samuel exclaimed. You have no proof. I took an envelope out of my jacket's inside pocket and handed it to Pierce. Here are copies of the request with your signature, and a sample of your real signature for comparison. I showed these documents to a graphologist. The signature is definitely fake. Pierce slowly opened the envelope and looked through the documents. His hands were shaking slightly. When did you manage to get this? He asked quietly without looking up. I had time while I was paying the bills for your wedding, I replied. I wanted to make sure my son wasn't being used. Pierce looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of bitterness and gratitude. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me? I asked. You were so caught up in her, so eager to prove something to me, that you didn't see the obvious. At that moment, one of the guests, a tall, gray-haired man in an expensive suit, stepped forward. Samuel, is this true? Is your company on the verge of bankruptcy? Samuel grimaced. Harvey, these are just temporary difficulties. We'll be back on track soon. You said the same thing 6 months ago when you asked me to invest in your latest project. The man shook his head. And you assured me that everything was stable. Harvey, please, not here. No, right here. Harvey turned to the other guests. Samuel owes my company almost $1 million. And judging by what I learned today, we'll never see that money. This statement opened the floodgates. Several other guests came forward with similar stories. It turned out that Samuel owed many of those present, ranging from small amounts to very impressive sums. He had used his position in society to obtain loans and investments without any real ability to repay them. That's not fair, Beverly cried as accusations flew from all sides. We threw a wonderful party, invited all of you, and you're attacking us like vultures. You threw a party with other people's money, I countered, and you invited these people to continue your game, to use the wedding as a smokescreen for your financial machinations. Beverly turned to Vanity. Do something. Get your fiancé back. Vanity rolled her eyes. He's not my fiancé anymore, Mom. The game is over. What do you mean the game is over? Beverly hissed. You were supposed to marry him. That was the plan. The plan failed, Vanity snapped. And I'm not going to pretend to love that whiner anymore. He doesn't even have his own money, let alone the balls to stand up to his daddy. Pierce watched the exchange with the expression of someone who had suddenly awakened from a long sleep. So all this time, he began quietly. All this time, they've been manipulating you, I finished for him. They used your resentment toward me, your desire to prove your independence. They found your weak spot and hit it right on target. Vanity snorted contemptuously. It was too easy. A couple of compliments, a little attention, and you were ready for anything, even to renounce your own father. Pierce looked as if he had been punched in the gut. I loved you, truly. How touching, Vanity rolled her eyes. But you can't pay bills with love, and you can't secure your future with it either. One of the waiters, who was still clearing glasses from the tables, couldn't help but whistle loudly. What a twist! His colleague nudged him with his elbow, but it was too late. The whole room burst into nervous laughter. The tension that had been hanging in the air was partially relieved. The guests who, a minute ago, had been shifting awkwardly from foot to foot, were now openly discussing what was happening, not hiding their shock and indignation. Samuel, realizing he had nothing to lose, turned to me. "Are you satisfied, Oakart? You ruined the wedding and disgraced us all in front of the guests. Is this your revenge?" "No," I replied calmly. "It's not revenge. It's protection. Protection of my son from people who saw him only as a means to achieve their goals." "You're just as hypocritical as we are," Samuel hissed. "Do you think I didn't check up on you? You've been a lousy father your whole life. You missed important events and put work above family. Your son had every right to hate you." I felt a pang of guilt because there was some truth in his words, but now was not the time to admit it. Maybe I wasn't the perfect father, but I never used my son. I never lied to him for my own benefit. "No, you just lied to him with your absence," Samuel retorted. I didn't have time to respond because Pierce suddenly stepped between us. "Enough, both of you." His voice sounded firm, more confident than I had heard in years. "I don't need defenders or accusers. I'll deal with my own life." He turned to Vanity. "You know, I should be grateful to you. You showed me how blind I was. Not just to you, but to my father." Then he looked at me. "And you showed me that, despite all our differences, you still care about me. Even if it's in your own, very radical way." Vanity grimaced contemptuously. "Oh, what a touching family scene. Maybe you'll hug and cry together next." "Vanity," Samuel snapped at her. "Shut up, you're only making the situation worse." "What situation, Dad?" She laughed, her laughter tinged with hysteria. "We have no money. Your business is on the verge of collapse. We've just embarrassed ourselves in front of all of Louisville high society. It can't get any worse." "It can," interrupted a man in a formal suit whom I didn't recognize, who had been silently watching the scene. "I'm Blake Sutton, the district attorney." He showed his ID. "And I'm here not as a guest, but on business. For the past 6 months, my team has been investigating the activities of Hensley Development. Today's revelations have been very informative." Samuel turned so pale that I seriously feared he would have a heart attack right there. "Blake, listen. This is all just a misunderstanding." "Dozens of defrauded investors and clients is not a misunderstanding, Samuel." The prosecutor cut him off. "It's systematic fraud. And I've heard enough now to issue a search warrant for all your offices and access to your bank accounts." Beverly made a strange sound, something between a sob and a moan. "Samuel, do something." But Samuel stood as if paralyzed, staring at a single point. Prosecutor Sutton gave a signal, and 2 more men emerged from the crowd of guests, obviously his assistants. "Mr. Hensley, I would recommend that you voluntarily report to my office tomorrow morning. Otherwise, I will have to issue a warrant for your arrest." Samuel nodded mechanically without saying a word. Suddenly, Vanity burst out laughing, loudly, unnaturally. "Just wonderful. The wedding is off. The company is ruined. My father is under investigation. What's next? A meteorite falling on our house?" "Vanity, calm down." Beverly tried to hug her daughter, but she pushed her away. "No, Mom, I won't calm down," Vanity shouted. "I put up with this bore for 5 months." She pointed her finger at Pierce. "Listened to his whining, pretended to be a bride in love. And for what? So I could stand here and watch my whole life fall apart?" "You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you." Her mother tried to calm her down. "Oh, sure," Vanity laughed hysterically. "The wonderful life of the daughter of a convicted fraudster, with no money, no status, no future. Great prospects." Pierce, who had been silently watching the scene, suddenly stepped toward Vanity. "You know what's the saddest thing? I really loved you, despite all your flaws, your selfishness and arrogance. I saw something special in you, something real." He smiled bitterly. "Obviously, I was wrong." "Oh, spare me your sentimental speeches," Vanity snapped. "You didn't love me. You loved the image I created especially for you. You have no idea who I really am." "Now I know," Pierce replied quietly. "And for that, I am grateful to you." He turned and headed for the exit, leaving Vanity standing with her mouth open. It was probably the first time I had ever seen her lose her voice. I followed my son, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. Yes, I had exposed the Hensley family and saved Pierce from a marriage of convenience. But at what cost? My relationship with my son was perhaps ruined forever. I caught up with Pierce in the club foyer. "Are you okay?" He stopped without turning around. "No, and I don't think I will be anytime soon." "I'm sorry things turned out this way." Pierce finally looked at me. "Really? You seem satisfied. You got your revenge." "I didn't want to hurt you," I said sincerely. "I wanted to protect you from the people who were using you." "Protect me?" Pierce smiled bitterly. "Or to prove that you're right and I'm wrong?" As always. I wanted to argue but held back. Maybe there was some truth in what he said. Maybe I was partly motivated by a desire to prove myself right. "You're angry with me," I stated, "and you have every right to be." "I'm not just angry at you," Pierce replied wearily. "I'm angry at everyone. At Vanity for using me. At her parents for their scheming. At myself for being so blind and stupid. And yes, at you for choosing this way to end it all." We stood in silence, broken only by the voices of the guests coming from the hall and the sound of the staff rushing to pack up the equipment. "What now?" I finally asked. Pierce shrugged. "I don't know. I need time. Time to figure all this out." He looked at me. "And you and me, too." I nodded. "I understand. And I'm willing to wait, as long as it takes." Pierce studied my face for a moment, as if searching for something, then simply nodded and headed for the exit. I remained standing in the foyer, watching my son walk away into the unknown, taking with him the wreckage of a failed wedding and perhaps our future. I sat on the back porch of my house watching the sun go down. A week had passed since the failed wedding, but the memories of that day remained as vivid and painful as ever. The whiskey in my glass had long since warmed up, and the ice had melted, but I had barely touched it. I didn't feel like drinking. I hadn't wanted much of anything in the last few days. Strangely, I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected when planning my revenge. Yes, I had exposed Hensley, saved my son from a marriage of convenience, and brought the fraudsters to justice. But there was no joy, only bitterness and a feeling of emptiness. Articles about the collapse of the Hensley empire had already appeared in the local news. Samuel was accused of fraud, money laundering, and financial machinations. Several banks filed a class action lawsuit. His company officially declared bankruptcy. Beverly, according to rumors, was hurriedly packing her bags to go to her sister's in Chicago. There was no news about Vanity, and I tried not to think about her. She was just a tool in the hands of her parents, albeit a very willing one. What worried me most was the lack of news from Pierce. After he left the club on that fateful day, I hadn't seen or heard from him. Several times I was tempted to call, but each time I stopped myself. He needed time. We both needed time. Eudora came by a couple of times, bringing homemade baked goods and news from the neighborhood. She didn't ask about the wedding, although she clearly knew something had gone wrong. She just sat there talking about her grandchildren, her garden, and the new supermarket that had opened a block away. Her presence was strangely comforting. The doorbell rang. I reluctantly got up from my chair and went to answer it, wondering who it could be at this hour. Tabitha King, the wedding planner, was standing on the doorstep. She looked tired and a little confused. "Mr. Oakhart," she began, nervously fiddling with the strap of her purse. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, not at all." I stepped aside, inviting her in. "Come in." "Has something happened?" Tabitha walked into the living room but refused to sit down, continuing to stand in the middle of the room. "I came to apologize, and to bring this." She handed me an envelope. "Here is a check for your advance. We are returning the money because the event did not take place." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "That's not necessary. You did your job." "No," Tabitha shook her head. "I didn't. I should have noticed all these oddities. The questions on the guest list, your exclusion from it, that awful photo." She faltered. "I'm a professional. I should have realized something was wrong." "You couldn't have known," I shrugged. "None of us knew what we were getting into." "I'm still ashamed," she lowered her eyes. "And by the way, about Hensley." Tabitha hesitated. "Yes?" I perked up. "Rumor has it they're leaving the country, before the trials begin. It turns out Samuel has dual citizenship. American and Cypriot. And Cyprus doesn't extradite for financial crimes like this. The news didn't surprise me. Samuel always gave the impression of being someone who thought through his escape routes. What about their daughter? I asked, not knowing why I wanted this information. Vanity? Tabitha shrugged. No one knows for sure. There are rumors that she's already flown to Europe. Others say she stayed here, trying to find modeling work in New York. Either way, we're unlikely to see her in Louisville again. I nodded. At least she's not pursuing Pierce, and that's a good thing. How's your son? Tabitha asked cautiously. Is he okay? I don't know, I replied honestly. We haven't spoken since that day. I'm so sorry. She looked genuinely upset. This must be a hard blow for him. It was a hard blow for all of us, I sighed. But life goes on, and maybe in the long run, it's for the best. Tabitha nodded, getting ready to leave. Anyway, thank you for seeing me. And again, I'm sorry for everything. I walked her to the door. As she was leaving, she turned around. You know what's strange? Despite all this scandal, my business has only grown. Everyone is talking about what happened, and many couples now want me as their organizer. They say that if I can handle such chaos, I can handle anything. She smiled faintly. It's funny how life turns out sometimes. After Tabitha left, I returned to the porch, holding the untouched envelope with the check in my hands. Money. It always comes down to money. I threw the envelope on the table, not wanting to think about it right now. The phone rang around 10 in the evening. I didn't immediately recognize the sound. I had become so unaccustomed to phone calls in recent days. When I saw the name on the screen, my heart skipped a beat. Pierce. Hello? My voice sounded hoarse, and I cleared my throat. It's me, my son said curtly. Good to hear from you. I tried to sound calm, even though I was tense with anticipation. Really? His voice was sarcastic. I'm not happy to be calling you. I remained silent, giving him a chance to speak. You know, I thought long and hard about whether I should even keep in touch with you, Pierce continued, after what you did. I was protecting you, I said quietly. Protecting me? He laughed bitterly. You ruined my life. You humiliated me in front of 200 people. You made me look like a complete idiot who was used and deceived. Do you have any idea what it's like for me to show up at work now? In the city. Everyone is whispering behind my back. Everyone knows what happened. I gripped the phone tighter. I didn't want it to turn out this way. Really? Pierce didn't hide his anger. How did you want it to turn out? You canceled all payments on the day of the wedding, showed up with a crowd of angry suppliers, and staged a public expose. How do you think it could have ended any differently? He was right. I had acted impulsively, driven by resentment and a desire for revenge. I hadn't thought about the consequences for Pierce. I'm so sorry, son, I said sincerely. I should have talked to you in private, shown you the evidence, convinced you. But you didn't, Pierce snapped. You chose the path of maximum damage, as always. What do you mean, as always? I felt a pang of hurt. When have I ever caused you damage? My whole life, he exclaimed. You always made all the decisions for me. What school to attend, what college to choose, what career to pursue. You never asked what I wanted, and now you've decided for me that I shouldn't marry Vanity. She used you, I reminded him. You saw it yourself. You heard her confession. Maybe I wanted to figure it out for myself. His voice was thick with tears. Maybe I needed to go through this myself, make my own mistakes, learn my own lessons. But no, the great Randall Oakhart always knows what's best for everyone. I was silent, unable to find the words. Every word he said hit the mark. You know what's the saddest thing? Continued Pierce, his voice quieter. Part of me is grateful to you. Grateful that you saved me from this marriage, from these people. But another part will never forgive you for the way you did it. I understand, I replied quietly. No, you don't, Pierce said bitterly. You never understood me, and now it's too late to start. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the line, but I didn't dare break the silence. I'm quitting the firm, Pierce finally said. I'm moving to Portland. A friend offered me a position at their law firm. I'm starting over, far away from this city and everyone who knows this story. Portland? That's on the other side of the country, I said, unable to hide my disappointment. Exactly. The farther away from you, the better, he replied harshly. His words hurt me more than I expected. When are you leaving? Next Monday. I've already given up my apartment and packed my things. So soon? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Maybe we could meet before you leave? Talk? About what? Pierce asked wearily. Everything has already been said. You need to understand one simple thing, Dad. You ruined my life. Yes, it was built on vanity's lies, but it was my life, and you had no right to interfere like that. I just wanted to protect you, I repeated, realizing how weak that sounded. From what? From your own mistakes? From life experience? Pierce sighed. You know, Mom never tried to control me the way you did. She let me make my own decisions, even when she knew I was wrong. The mention of Elaine stung me. She was wiser than me, I admitted. Yes, she was, Pierce agreed. I have to go. Take care of yourself. You too, I replied. And know that no matter what, I love you, son. Pierce paused for a second, then simply said, Goodbye, Dad. The connection was lost. I sat there for a long time with the phone in my hand, staring at the blank screen. Something told me that this call was a farewell, that Pierce was really leaving my life, perhaps forever. The next few days passed in a blur. I mechanically went about my daily routine, eating, sleeping, watering the flowers in the garden. But inside there was emptiness. Pierce left without even saying goodbye in person. I found out from Eudora, who saw him loading his things into a taxi early Monday morning. I thought you knew, she said, looking at me in surprise. He didn't even come in to say goodbye? I shook my head, unable to say a word. Oh, Randall, Eudora put her wrinkled hand on mine. I'm so sorry, but you know time heals. Give him time. What if there isn't enough time, I asked. What if he never forgives me? Then you'll have to learn to live with that, she replied simply. Just as I've learned to live without Frank. Just as you've learned to live without Elaine. We're stronger than we think, Randall. That evening, I sat in my office for a long time, sorting through old photographs. Pierce as a child, smiling, missing his front teeth. Pierce as a teenager, sullen and awkward. Pierce at his college graduation, proud and confident. And the last photo of us together, 3 years ago, at Elaine's funeral. We're standing side by side, but there's already an invisible chasm between us, the beginning of the end. The phone rang, pulling me out of my memories. I thought it was Pierce again and rushed to answer, but it was Eudora. Randall, you won't believe this, she exclaimed without preamble. My son Tommy asked me to move in with him in Seattle. He has a big house, there's plenty of room, and it's too hard for me to live alone in this huge house. And you know what? I said yes. That's wonderful, Eudora, I replied sincerely, happy for my neighbor. But there's a problem, she continued. I don't want to sell the house to strangers. So many memories, so much history. And I thought of you. You said you wanted to start from scratch, to leave the city. Why don't you buy my house, rent it out, earn passive income, and move wherever you want? I froze, stunned by the unexpected offer. Indeed, lately I had been thinking more and more about leaving Louisville. Too many memories, too many ghosts of the past. But I always found reasons to stay. The house, the garden that Elaine loved, the proximity to the places where we were happy. And now the last thread, Pierce, had been severed. Eudora, that's a very generous offer, but I'm not sure. Don't answer right away, she interrupted me. Think about it. We're in no rush. But you know, sometimes the best thing we can do is leave the past behind and start a new chapter. You're 68, not 98. You can still have a wonderful life. After talking to Eudora, I went out into the garden. Elaine's roses were blooming, filling the air with their sweet scent. I touched their delicate petals, thinking about how quickly time passes, how quickly everything changes. People leave, feelings fade, only memories remain, and the choice is to cling to the past or move forward. That night, I made my decision. I called Eudora and told her I agreed to buy her house. Then I contacted an old friend in Charleston, South Carolina, who had been asking me to join his consulting firm for a long time. Are you serious? He asked incredulously. Randall Oakhart is moving to Charleston? I never thought I'd see the day. Life is full of surprises, I replied, and it's time for me to give myself one. 2 weeks later, I stood on the porch of my house, taking one last look at the place where I had lived for almost 30 years, where I had been happy with Elaine, where I had raised my son, where I had known both joy and sorrow. The boxes of my belongings had already been sent to Charleston, and the furniture had been sold or given away. I kept only a few family heirlooms and photographs. I attached an envelope to the door with the word Pierce written on it. Inside was a short letter and the keys to the house. I wrote that the house now belonged to him, that it was both my legacy and my apology, that I respected his choice to stay away from me, but hoped that someday we could talk like adults, without accusations or bitterness, that I would wait as long as it took. I left the garden in the care of a professional gardener who promised to take care of Elaine's roses. The house will wait for Pierce if he ever decides to return. And me, I will build a new life, without toxic relationships, without the ghosts of the past, without the guilt that had haunted me all these years. Picking up my suitcase, I took one last look at the house and garden. Something told me that I would never return here, but it didn't make me sad, only calm acceptance. Sometimes you have to let go of the past to find the future. Sometimes you have to lose to find. Getting into the taxi, I gave the address of the airport. A new chapter in my life was beginning today. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not bitterness and regret, but calm determination. I did what I had to do. I protected my son, preserved my dignity, and didn't let others manipulate me. Perhaps I paid too high a price for it, but it was my choice, and I was ready to live with the consequences. The taxi pulled away, taking me from the past to an unknown but promising future. I didn't look back.